No one in the ER knew the bleeding man on the stretcher ran the city's most brutal crime syndicate. They just saw another gunshot victim. But when an arrogant doctor humiliated the plus-size nurse who saved his life, the cartel boss woke up, and a loaded pistol changed everything. Chloe Bennett knew exactly how much space she took up in the world. At 260 pounds, she was a fat woman living in a society that constantly demanded she shrink herself. But inside the chaotic, blood-slicked trauma bays of Chicago's Mercy General Hospital, her size was an anchor. When a crashing patient needed to be rolled, Chloe was the one with the strength to do it. When a violent, drug-addled arrival needed to be held down so a sedative could be administered, Chloe's solid, unyielding presence kept her colleagues safe. She was a brilliant trauma nurse, her mind a steel trap of medical protocols and dosage calculations. Yet to Dr. Harrison Croft, she was just an easy target. Dr. Croft was the hospital's golden boy, a 32-year-old Ivy League-educated trauma surgeon with a jawline carved from marble and an ego the size of Manhattan. He drove a Porsche, dated a string of catalog models, and possessed a cruelty that he masked as demanding excellence. For reasons Chloe could only attribute to his own shallow insecurities, Croft had made it his personal mission to make her life a living hell. "Bennett, are you going to waddle over here with those charts, or do I need to leave a trail of donuts to motivate you?" Croft had sneered just a week prior, right in front of a group of wide-eyed medical students. Chloe had flushed a deep, humiliating red, but she had bitten her tongue, handing him the iPad with a steady hand. She needed this job. She was paying off her late mother's medical debts, and Mercy General paid the best differential for the graveyard shift. It was a Tuesday at 2:14 a.m. when the double doors of the ER burst open, shattering the quiet hum of the hospital. Paramedics rushed in, their voices overlapping in a frantic staccato. John Doe, approximate age 35, 3 gunshot wounds, shoulder, abdomen, and right thigh. Pressure is tanking 80/40. He's bleeding out from the femoral. Chloe was moving before the doors even fully swung shut. She didn't jog. She moved with a practiced heavy urgency, her thick thighs chafing under her dark blue scrubs, but her hands were already snapping on a pair of latex gloves. The man on the gurney was a mess of crimson. He was wearing a bespoke, charcoal grey suit that had been shredded by bullets and shears. His face was pale, his dark hair matted with sweat, but his eyes, a striking, terrifying shade of ice blue, were wide open and fiercely lucid. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't thrashing. He was staring at the ceiling with the cold calculation of a man calculating his own odds of survival. Trauma 1. "Let's go," yelled Sarah, another nurse. Dr. Croft strutted into the trauma bay, snapping his gloves on his face, a mask of irritated superiority. "All right, what do we have? Another gangbanger who doesn't know how to aim. Femoral artery is compromised, doctor," Chloe stated loudly, ignoring his commentary. She stepped up to the gurney. The paramedic who had been keeping pressure on the man's thigh stepped back, his hands shaking. The moment the pressure released, a geyser of bright red arterial blood sprayed upward, hitting the overhead surgical lamp. "Christ!" Croft shouted, taking a sudden step back to avoid getting blood on his custom-tailored scrubs. He hesitated. For exactly 2 seconds, the brilliant Dr. Croft froze. 2 seconds is an eternity when a major artery is severed. Chloe didn't think. She lunged forward, throwing her entire upper body weight onto the patient's thigh. She jammed her gloved hands directly into the open, ragged wound, finding the slick, severed end of the femoral artery and clamping her thick fingers down on it with brutal force. She pressed down with all 260 pounds of her body weight, locking her elbows. The man on the table let out a low, guttural snarl of agony. His icy blue eyes snapped away from the ceiling and locked directly onto Chloe's face. "I know it hurts." Chloe panted, her face mere inches from his sweat beading on her forehead. "But if I let go, you bleed out in 90 seconds. Stay with me." The man didn't blink. Through the blinding pain, he stared at the woman pinning him down. He noticed the sweat on her brow, the absolute lack of panic in her hazel eyes, and the sheer physical strength she was using to keep him tethered to the mortal coil. "Croft!" Chloe barked, shocking the entire room. Nurses didn't yell at attending surgeons. "I can't hold this forever. Get the clamp. Get a central line in his neck. He needs O-negative blood. Now." Croft blinked, snapping out of his momentary paralysis. His face contorted in anger at being ordered around by the nurse he despised, but the sheer volume of blood forced his hand. "Don't you raise your voice at me, Bennett," he hissed, grabbing the surgical clamps. "I'm the doctor here." For the next 45 minutes, Trauma 1 was a war zone. Chloe did not move. Her back screamed in agony, her knees ached, and her hands cramped painfully as she maintained the tourniquet-like pressure on the man's artery, while Croft worked to temporarily ligate the vessel. Throughout the entire ordeal, the stranger kept his eyes fixed on Chloe. He didn't look at Croft. He didn't look at the monitors. He watched the heavy-set, exhausted nurse who had thrown her body onto his to save his life. By the time they wheeled the man up to emergency surgery, Chloe was covered in blood. She leaned against the wall of the trauma bay, sliding down until she hit the linoleum floor, gasping for air. Croft stood over her, pulling off his bloody gown. He looked down his nose at her. "Next time you bark orders at me in my ER, Bennett, I'll have you written up for insubordination. You're lucky you didn't crush his leg with all that bulk." He walked away, leaving Chloe alone on the floor. She closed her eyes, fighting back the sting of tears. She had just saved a man's life, and still she was nothing more than a punchline. She had no idea that the man she had just saved was Dominic Moretti, the head of the largest and most feared organized crime family in the Midwest. And she had no idea that Dominic Moretti never forgot a face, especially not the face of someone who had done him a service. 3 days later, the hospital was buzzing with quiet, terrified whispers. John Doe was no longer a mystery. The moment Dominic Moretti had emerged from a successful 6-hour surgery, the hospital had been quietly locked down by men in dark suits. The local police had arrived, taken one look at the grim-faced men standing in the hallways, and conveniently decided the shooting was outside their immediate jurisdiction. Dominic was moved to the VIP wing on the top floor, a secluded suite usually reserved for politicians and wealthy donors. The nursing staff was terrified of him. The men guarding his door, particularly a massive scarred enforcer named Carmine, thoroughly searched anyone who came within 50 feet of the room. The nurses who drew the short straw to check Dominic's vitals came back, pale and shaking, reporting that the Mafia Boss sat in his bed like a wounded lion, watching their every move with predatory silence. Chloe naturally was assigned to his room for the duration of her shifts. "Croft did it on purpose," Sarah whispered furiously to Chloe at the nurse's station, holding the assignment sheet. "He knows everyone is terrified of that floor, so he put you on primary care for the mobster. He's trying to punish you for yelling at him in the trauma bay." Chloe sighed, adjusting her stethoscope around her thick neck. "It's fine, Sarah. A patient is a patient. Bullet wounds all heal the same." When Chloe first walked into the VIP suite, Carmine, the bodyguard, stepped in her path. He looked her up and down, a hard scowl on his face. Chloe didn't flinch. She looked the heavily armed man dead in the eye. "I need to check his blood pressure and change the dressing on his shoulder," Chloe said, her voice flat and professional. "You can pat me down. You can wand me with a metal detector, or you can step aside. But if he gets an infection because his bandages are dirty, that's on you." From inside the room, a deep, raspy voice called out, "Let her in, Carmine." Chloe walked in. The room was lavish, but smelled faintly of antiseptic and copper. Dominic Moretti was propped up against the pillows. He looked better than he had in the ER, though his skin was still drawn and pale. The IV lines snaked into his heavily tattooed arms. "You," Dominic said. It wasn't a question. "Me," Chloe replied, stepping up to the bed. She efficiently began unwrapping the gauze on his shoulder. "You're the one who pinned me down," Dominic stated, his ice-blue eyes tracking her movements. "I remember you. I remember your face. You were bleeding to death, Mr. Moretti. I did what was necessary." Chloe kept her eyes on the wound, cleaning the angry red edges with saline. "I apologize if I bruised you." Dominic let out a harsh, dry chuckle that ended in a wince. "You saved my life." "The doctor." He froze. "I saw him." "You didn't." Chloe paused, her hands hovering over his chest. She looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time. Beneath the terrifying reputation, he was just a man in pain. "Dr. Croft is an excellent surgeon," she lied softly. "He repaired the artery." "He's a coward," Dominic corrected his tone, leaving no room for argument. "What is your name?" "Chloe." "Well, Chloe, I owe you a debt." "You don't owe me anything. Just take your antibiotics and don't pull out your stitches," she said, taping the fresh gauze down. Over the next 2 days, an odd dynamic developed between the plus-size nurse and the Mafia Boss. Dominic refused to let anyone else touch his bandages. He tolerated the doctors, but he only spoke to Chloe. He watched her work. He noticed how her feet ached after a 12-hour shift, though she tried to hide her limp. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes. Dominic Moretti was a man who survived by reading people, and in Chloe Bennett he saw a woman of immense strength carrying a heavy burden of sorrow. The tipping point happened on a Thursday morning. Chloe was in Dominic's room, adjusting his IV drip. Dominic was sitting up, reading a leather-bound ledger, looking entirely too dangerous for a man in a hospital gown. The door swung open, and Dr. Harrison Croft strutted in, followed by 3 young medical residents. Croft didn't even look at Dominic. His eyes were glued to the tablet in his hands. "All right, Mr. Moretti, looks like your white blood cell count is stable," Croft said breezily. He turned to one of the residents. "Bump his morphine drip up by 2 milligrams and schedule him for a physical therapy consult." Chloe frowned, looking at the chart at the end of the bed. "Dr. Croft, I don't think we should increase the morphine. His respiratory rate dropped into the low teens last night while he was sleeping. An increase could suppress his breathing entirely. We should switch him to a non-narcotic pain manager." The room went dead silent. Croft slowly lowered his tablet. The look of pure, unadulterated venom on his face made the medical residents take a collective step back. He looked from Chloe to the residents and back to Chloe. He felt challenged, humiliated, and Harrison Croft never let a humiliation go unpunished. "Nurse Bennett," Croft said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Did you suddenly acquire an MD from the hospital cafeteria? Because last time I checked you were a nurse, and not even a particularly fast one." Chloe's face burned. "Doctor, I'm just reading his vitals from the night shift." "What you are doing?" Croft interrupted, his voice, rising, taking a step toward her, "is overstepping your bounds. Again. You think because you threw your massive, sweaty weight on a patient the other night, you're suddenly my equal." Chloe took a step back, her back hitting the wall. Croft wasn't stopping. He was playing to his audience of residents, intent on destroying her. I write the orders, Bennett. You follow them. If you spent half as much time studying medical texts as you do raiding the vending machines on the 3rd floor, maybe you'd understand the pharmacology involved here. Croft let out a cruel, mocking laugh. Honestly, I'm surprised your scrubs haven't burst at the seams yet. It's a miracle you can even fit through the doors to get into this room. Now shut your mouth, waddle over to the Pyxis machine, and get the medication I ordered. The residents awkwardly shifted their weight, a few of them stifling nervous chuckles. Chloe felt the hot sting of tears welling in her eyes. Her chest tightened. It was the ultimate nightmare, being degraded, reduced entirely to her size, stripped of her professional dignity in front of an audience. She looked down at the floor, wanting the linoleum to open up and swallow her whole. I'll go get the medication, Chloe whispered, her voice cracking. She turned to leave. Nobody moves. The voice was quiet. It wasn't a yell. It was a cold, raspy whisper that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Doctor. Croft paused, turning around to look at the bed with a patronizing smile. Mr. Moretti, please don't worry. The nurse is just... Croft's voice died in his throat. Dominic Moretti was out of bed. He was standing, ignoring the agonizing pull of the stitches in his abdomen and thigh. But that wasn't what made the blood drain from Croft's handsome face. In Dominic's right hand, resting casually against his hip, was a matte black Glock 19. It had been smuggled in by Carmine the day before. Before Croft could even process what was happening, Dominic moved with a terrifying, fluid violence. He crossed the room in 2 strides, ignoring his injuries, and grabbed Dr. Croft by the throat of his expensive white coat. He slammed the surgeon backward into the heavy oak door, pinning him there. The residents screamed and scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the far wall. Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Dominic didn't look at the residents. He didn't look at Chloe. His ice-blue eyes were locked onto Croft's terrified, wide eyes. Slowly, methodically, Dominic raised the Glock and pressed the cold steel barrel directly against the center of Dr. Harrison Croft's forehead. "You like to talk," Dominic whispered, the sound like gravel grinding against glass. "You like to make jokes, so let's have a conversation, Doctor." Croft was trembling violently, his hands raised in surrender tears instantly springing to his eyes. Please, what are you doing? I'm your doctor." "No," Dominic said, pressing the gun harder against the bone, forcing Croft's head back against the wood. "You are the coward who froze while I was bleeding out. She is the reason I am breathing." Dominic tilted his head toward Chloe, though he kept his eyes on Croft. "This woman dragged me back from the grave. She held my life in her hands. And you arrogant, worthless little worm. You think you can disrespect her in my presence." I'm sorry, I was just... Click. Dominic pulled the hammer back on the pistol. The metallic sound echoed like a thunderclap in the silent room. "I don't care about your medical degree." Dominic breathed his face inches from Croft's. "I don't care about your sports car or your ego. Out on the streets, men like you beg men like me for mercy. If you ever speak to her like that again, if you ever look at her with anything less than absolute reverence, I will blow your brains all over this expensive wallpaper, and I will sleep like a baby tonight. Do you understand me?" Dr. Harrison Croft was weeping. The golden boy of Mercy General, the man who paraded his Ivy League pedigree like a crown, was reduced to a trembling, sobbing mess against the oak door. A dark, embarrassing stain began to spread across the front of his custom-tailored scrub pants. The stench of urine hit the air sharp and pathetic. "I understand," Croft choked out his voice, an octave higher than usual, tears spilling down his perfectly moisturized cheeks. "I swear to God, I understand, please." Dominic held the gun steady for 3 more agonizing seconds, letting the sheer terror carve itself into the surgeon's soul. Then he slowly lowered the weapon. "Get out of my sight," Dominic whispered. "And if you ever schedule yourself on my floor again, or if I hear you so much as breathe in Nurse Bennett's direction, I will have Carmine pay a visit to your lovely penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. Go." Croft scrambled sideways, practically falling over his own feet, as he tore the door open and sprinted down the hallway, leaving his stunned, hyperventilating medical residents behind. The residents didn't wait for a dismissal. They bolted after him like frightened sheep. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Chloe and Dominic alone in the sudden ringing silence. The adrenaline that had fueled Dominic's explosive movement abruptly vanished. A sharp hiss escaped his lips, and he swayed his hand, dropping to his abdomen. The stark white of his hospital gown was blossoming with fresh, bright crimson. He had torn his stitches. "You idiot!" Chloe breathed, the shock finally breaking. Her nursing instincts overrode her terror. She rushed forward, wrapping her thick, sturdy arm around his waist to catch his weight before he hit the floor. He was heavy, solid muscle and bone, but Chloe's 260 pounds gave her the leverage she needed. She braced her thick thighs, took his weight against her ample chest, and carefully maneuvered him back onto the bed. "Carmine!" Chloe yelled toward the door. The massive enforcer stepped in instantly, his eyes darting to the blood. "Get me a suture kit from the cart outside, now." For the next 20 minutes, Chloe worked in tense silence, restitching the torn fascia of his abdominal wound. Dominic lay back, his breathing ragged, but his ice-blue eyes never left her face. He didn't look at her with the clinical, disgusted gaze that Croft or the rest of the world used. He looked at her with a raw, burning intensity. He watched the steady precision of her plush, capable hands. He looked at the soft curve of her jaw, the fierce concentration in her hazel eyes, and the undeniable power of a woman who commanded the room simply by being exactly who she was. "You didn't have to do that," Chloe finally said, quietly snipping the last suture thread. She reached for the gauze, her cheeks flushed. "He's a surgeon, Mr. Moretti. You could have gotten yourself arrested, or worse, killed by hospital security." "Dominic," he corrected her, his voice hoarse. "And no one is arresting me. Not in Chicago. The current police superintendent, David Brown, owes my family favors that go back 2 decades. I am untouchable." He reached out his large, calloused hand, gently wrapping around her thick wrist. His thumb brushed over her pulse point. "And I did have to do that. No one disrespects a woman under my protection, especially not a woman who looks like you." Chloe froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She tried to pull her hand back, a defensive wall instantly slamming down around her heart. "Please, Dominic, don't mock me. I get enough of that from men like Croft. Look at me, Chloe." The command was soft, but absolute. She lifted her gaze, meeting his piercing blue eyes. "I am a man who deals in absolute truths," Dominic said slowly, his grip on her wrist firm but tender. "I have dated models, actresses, women who spend thousands of dollars to look like plastic dolls. They are fragile. They are empty. When I looked up in that trauma bay, bleeding out, the last thing I wanted was a fragile woman. I saw a goddess. I saw a woman with the strength to hold back death. There is nothing about your body, your size, or your spirit that requires an apology. You are magnificent." A tear slipped down Chloe's cheek, hot and unbidden. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever looked at her body as a source of awe rather than a punchline. Before she could process his words, Carmine's heavy voice echoed from the doorway. "Boss, we have a problem." Dominic's tender expression vanished, replaced instantly by the cold, calculating mask of a mafia king. "What is it, Carmine?" "One of my guys on the ground floor just intercepted a radio transmission," Carmine said, grimly, stepping into the room and locking the heavy door behind him. "The hit on you. It wasn't a rival family. It was your underboss, Paulie. He bought off the security detail. And right now there are 6 heavily armed men, dressed as Chicago PD, walking through the lobby. They aren't here to arrest you. They're here to finish the job." Chloe's blood ran cold. The hospital was compromised. "We need to move." "Now," Dominic said, throwing his legs over the side of the bed. He winced in agony, but stood up, grabbing his clothes from the closet. "Carmine, call the transport chopper. Have it meet us on the roof of the adjacent parking garage." "Boss, you can't walk that far," Carmine argued. "You'll bleed out again." "He's right," Chloe said, stepping into Dominic's path, her broad frame blocking him. "Your blood pressure is already dropping. If you exert yourself, the femoral artery will rupture." Dominic stopped looking at her. "Then what do you suggest, Nurse Bennett?" "Because staying here means we all die." Chloe looked around the room, her mind racing. A wheelchair is too obvious. They'll be looking for a man being pushed, but they won't be looking for a morgue transport. 10 minutes later, Chloe pushed a heavy stainless steel morgue cart down the hospital's dimly lit basement corridors. Zipped inside a thick black body bag lay Dominic. Carmine walked paces behind her, disguised as an orderly, his hand resting on a short-barreled shotgun hidden beneath a stack of soiled linens. Chloe's thick thighs burned as she forced the heavy cart toward the service elevators. Just as they arrived, the doors chimed open and 2 men in Chicago PD windbreakers stepped out. Their eyes were cold, calculating, and completely wrong for local beat cops. "Hold up!" one of the men barked, stepping into her path and slapping his hand onto the cold metal cart. "Hospital's on lockdown. What's in the bag, sweetheart?" Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs, but years of wrangling, combative patience took over. She drew herself up to her full imposing height, using every inch and all 260 pounds of her frame to physically dominate the space. "A highly infectious, drug-resistant tuberculosis cadaver officer." Chloe lied smoothly, her voice ringing with absolute exhausted authority. "I am transporting the body to the CDC containment van. Unless you want to inhale aerosolized bacteria that will liquefy your lungs in 3 days, I suggest you take your hand off my cart." The fake cop snatched his hand back, as if burned his face, paling. "Go ahead." They rushed out to the parking garage, where an armored black SUV idled. Once Dominic was loaded into the back seat, gasping for air and slick with sweat, Carmine handed Chloe a thick envelope. 50 grand in cash," the enforcer said. "Walk away, nurse." Chloe stared at the money enough to erase her mother's lingering medical debts to Encore Capital Group forever. But before she could take it, Dominic grabbed her wrist. "Paulie's men saw your face." Dominic rasped, his ice-blue eyes burning with fierce, undeniable protectiveness. "Your apartment in Rogers Park isn't safe anymore. Come with me, Chloe. Come to my estate. Be my private physician. I will give you a life where no man ever speaks down to you again." Chloe looked back at the hospital, a place of endless mockery and exhausting labor, and then at the ruthless Mafia Boss who treated her like royalty. She climbed into the SUV. 6 months later, the Chicago underworld bowed to a new reality. Dominic had violently reclaimed his empire, but the real shock was the woman sitting beside him at the head of the table. Chloe Bennett no longer wore cheap, ill-fitting scrubs. She wore custom-tailored designer silk that worshipped her generous curves, thick thighs, and full hips. She was his queen, his closest advisor, and his equal. As for Dr. Harrison Croft, his prestigious medical license was quietly revoked, after a devastating anonymous tip to the Illinois Medical Board regarding missing narcotics. He vanished into rural obscurity, jumping at shadows, terrified of the day the devil might finally collect his due. Dominic, however, never gave the arrogant surgeon a second thought. He was far too busy admiring the brilliant, beautiful plus-size woman who had saved his life and stolen his dark heart. Did this story of unexpected romance, mafia justice, and a strong, beautiful woman taking her rightful place on the throne keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved seeing arrogant bullies get what they deserve, and watching true love bloom in the most dangerous places, hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who loves a good mafia romance, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic stories every week.